Part 1. Laura and I met at a charity fundraiser during our junior year of college. One of those fancy events where everyone pretends they care about the cause more than the free drinks. I was there with Jonathan, my best friend since high school, mostly because he was trying to chat up some marketing major and needed me to play wingman. Laura wasn't part of the crowd either. She admitted later she only went because her roommate Samantha dragged her along to network. Laura was studying to become a nurse. Samantha was business-minded, already networking her way into internships. The two of them were practically inseparable. I remember seeing Laura from across the room, laughing at something Samantha whispered in her ear. There was something magnetic about her, this warmth that made her feel like the only real person in a room full of posers. Jonathan caught me staring and nudged me toward her with a smirk. When I introduced myself, Laura greeted me with a smile that made the entire room blur into the background. We ended up talking all night, forgetting about our friends' separate missions. We laughed about how out of place we felt, shared stories about our families, and swapped numbers before the night ended. That was the beginning. We started dating soon after. Study dates at the library turned into late-night drives for greasy burgers. Picnics at the park replaced stuffy college parties. She was the type of girl who laughed at my corny jokes and somehow made cramming for finals feel like an adventure. Jonathan would often joke that I was whipped, but I didn't care. I was crazy about her. 3 years later, we got married. It was a modest ceremony, nothing like the glitzy event where we met. Just family, a few close friends, and a lot of cheap champagne. Jonathan was my best man, naturally. Laura had Samantha as her maid of honor. The speeches were awkward and heartfelt, the kind that stick with you long after the buzz wears off. We bought a cozy house on the outskirts of town, complete with a white picket fence. I laughed at the cliché, but Laura adored it. I was working my way up at an engineering firm while she was thriving at the local hospital. Life had a rhythm, and it suited us. Summers were spent traveling Mexico, Hawaii, a road trip through the Rockies where we nearly froze to death because I was too stubborn to admit the heater in the rental car was busted. Laura laughed about it the whole way. She had a knack for turning my screw-ups into funny stories. Even our worst days seemed easier with her around. Weekends were for friends. Jonathan and Samantha would come over, and we'd sit around the fire pit, roasting marshmallows and swapping stories. Jonathan was the loud, charismatic type, always cracking jokes. Samantha was more reserved, but her laugh was genuine and infectious. The four of us became our own little circle, tight-knit and reliable. Laura and Samantha would retreat into the kitchen, wine glasses in hand, plotting our next group vacation or gossiping about their coworkers. It was the kind of friendship most people only read about. They'd spend hours talking about everything from work drama to the latest Netflix craze. I loved seeing her so happy, her eyes lighting up when she was in her element. Laura and I talked about kids often. Not urgently, just in that dreamy way you do when life feels like it's stretching out endlessly in front of you. We were happy. The kind of happiness that feels solid, built on years of companionship and trust. We'd lay in bed on lazy Sunday mornings, imagining our future kids running around the backyard. I'd come home most nights to find her curled up on the couch with a book, her hair pulled back and her glasses sliding down her nose. She was addicted to crime novels where the husband was always the killer. I'd tease her about it, and she'd laugh, calling me her favorite suspect. Looking back, those were the best years of my life. It felt like everything was aligned. Work was good. Home was better. And Laura was everything. The woman I planned to grow old with. There were spontaneous road trips, late-night cooking experiments gone wrong, and lazy evenings spent watching the same movie for the 100th time because it was her favorite. It was never boring, never stale. Just right. We made a tradition of hosting Thanksgiving every year, inviting Jonathan, Samantha, and a few other friends over for a feast that would leave us all groaning on the couch afterward. Laura would be in her element, bustling around the kitchen, somehow managing to make 3 side dishes at once without breaking a sweat. Life was good. We were happy. And I had everything I ever wanted. Part 2. It all started when Laura came home one evening, her face lit up with excitement like a kid on Christmas morning. "Yes, what?" she said, bouncing on her toes in the doorway. "My team at the hospital wants to do Thanksgiving together this year. Just something small at Jessica's place." Thanksgiving. I repeated, raising an eyebrow. It wasn't like Laura to get this thrilled over a work event. Normally, she'd complain about how exhausting the shifts were, or how the admin staff made her job harder than it needed to be. But this was new. "Yeah," she continued, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter. "You know, Just a casual potluck sort of thing. We're all bringing a dish. It's on Thanksgiving Day, but it's only for a few hours. I shrugged and smiled. Sounds fun. What are you bringing? Probably my sweet potato casserole. Everyone loves it, she said with a grin. It seemed harmless. And if anything, I was happy to see her excited about something. Laura had been working crazy hours lately, always coming home late and falling asleep as soon as her head hit the pillow. She'd joke about how I was lucky if I got a full sentence out of her after 10 p.m. But then she brought it up again the next night. And the night after that. It was like the hospital Thanksgiving had become the social event of the decade. She spent days planning her dish, even going as far as trying out new recipes to perfect her usual casserole. Laura, I laughed one night as she scrolled through Pinterest, searching for new twists on marshmallow toppings. You're acting like you're hosting the damn thing. It's just a potluck. She rolled her eyes. I just want it to be good. Jessica's boyfriend is some kind of chef, and I don't want to embarrass myself. I'd never known Laura to care what people thought of her cooking. She'd always been confident about it, whether it was dinner for friends or a romantic night for the two of us. Her sudden obsession with perfection felt odd, but I shrugged it off. Maybe she was just trying to make a good impression. But the changes didn't stop there. She started spending more time on her phone, her fingers dancing across the screen as if her life depended on it. I'd walk into her room, and she'd quickly put it down, flashing me a distracted smile. What's so interesting? I asked one night, leaning over the back of the couch where she was curled up, her phone held close to her chest. Just work stuff, she said, her eyes flicking away before settling back on her screen. Jessica's trying to coordinate everything for Thanksgiving. Must be one hell of a group chat, I joked, but she just mumbled something and kept scrolling. Then came the night she stayed late at the hospital. Not unusual for her line of work, but the frequency began to feel off. Too many late shifts, too many excuses about how they were short-staffed, or had a surprise inspection. It became almost routine to eat dinner alone and fall asleep on the couch before she even got home. When Thanksgiving week rolled around, Laura seemed distant. Like her body was there, but her mind was somewhere else. She was glued to her phone, more than ever. A part of me wanted to ask her about it, to really dig into why she was acting so damn secretive. But I didn't. I told myself it was nothing. I'd always trusted Laura, so why stop now? It wasn't until Thanksgiving morning that I felt the first real sting of doubt. She was frantic, pacing around the kitchen, double-checking her casserole dish and packing things into the car like she was about to board a plane to another country. I'll probably be back late, she called over her shoulder. Jessica said we could stay as long as we wanted, so don't wait up. Have fun, I replied, trying to sound cheerful, but even I could hear the hint of irritation in my voice. She kissed me quickly and rushed out the door, her car's tires kicking up gravel as she sped down the driveway. And just like that, she was gone. I spent the rest of the day trying to ignore the knot in my stomach, watching football alone, reheating leftovers, checking my phone more often than usual, just to see if she'd text me or let me know when she'd be heading back. She didn't. When she finally did come home, it was past midnight. Her hair was a mess and her eyes were glassy from wine. It was great, she mumbled, half asleep already. Just so much fun. But something felt off. Maybe it was her sudden obsession with the whole event. Maybe it was the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. Or maybe it was just me, overthinking everything. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Part 3. The thing about suspicion is that it festers. It sinks its claws into you and keeps twisting until it finds something to latch onto. Thanksgiving came and went, and Laura's obsession with her hospital dinner lingered in my mind. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. She had left that morning with her dish packed neatly in the passenger seat, hair done up like she was heading to some high-profile event instead of a casual Thanksgiving potluck. I tried not to read too much into it. But as the hours dragged on and my calls went unanswered, my patience thinned. She told me not to wait up. I had told myself not to worry. Both of us were liars. By the time midnight rolled around, I was pacing the living room, my phone gripped tightly in my hand. I'd sent her a few texts, all of which were left unread. That alone would have been enough to piss me off, but what really got me was how out of character it felt. Laura was always good about checking in, especially when she knew I'd be home alone. When she finally walked through the door around 1 in the morning, her hair was disheveled and her eyes glassy. She mumbled something about wine and laughter and fell asleep before I could ask anything substantial. The next morning, I tried to brush it off. But her phone was buzzing nonstop, lighting up with messages I couldn't help but notice. Names I didn't recognize. Messages she hurriedly swiped away before I could get a good look. I didn't press her on it. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, she'd been working her ass off, and maybe she just needed to blow off some steam. But paranoia doesn't go away just because you ignore it. It just digs in deeper. I kept replaying her words over and over. Jessica said we could stay as long as we wanted, so don't wait up. But if that was the case, why was she dodging my questions? Why did she seem more interested in her phone than talking to me? 2 days later, Jonathan called. Said he wanted to catch up over a beer. I welcomed the distraction, figuring some guy time would be good for me. I met him at our usual spot, a dingy bar with more memories soaked into the seats than I cared to admit. He looked uncomfortable, his beer untouched as he fidgeted with the coaster. I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, he started, as avoiding mine. But I thought you deserved to know. What's up? I asked, already feeling my chest tighten. You know Justin, right? The guy Laura works with, he said. I've heard her mention him. Why? My sister Samantha works at the hospital too. She saw Laura and Justin leaving together that night. Not just leaving, like, sneaking out, avoiding the rest of the group. His voice was low, like he was ashamed to be the one saying it. I felt my heart sink. Maybe they were just giving each other a ride, I said, the words tasting bitter even as I spoke them. Maybe, Jonathan replied. But Samantha saw them later. At some hotel bar across town. They were, well, let's just say they weren't acting like colleagues. I stared at him, my pulse thundering in my ears. You're serious? I wish I wasn't, Jonathan said. But she said it looked pretty damn obvious. And I figured you needed to know. I left the bar feeling like my insides had been torn apart. The worst part? A sick part of me almost felt relieved. Because now I had a reason. A reason for why everything felt wrong. A reason for her late nights, her secrecy, her damn phone constantly lighting up. When I got home, Laura was in the shower. Her phone was left on the kitchen counter, charging. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, but all of them led to one conclusion: I needed proof. I waited for her next hospital dinner excuse, acting supportive while my mind raced with suspicion. Sure enough, it didn't take long. The following Friday, she mentioned another late night. I nodded, pretending to be absorbed in something on my phone. Once she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her. I kept my distance, my car far enough back to not be noticed, but close enough to keep her in sight. The drive took her not to the hospital or even Jessica's place, but to a swanky hotel on the other side of town. I parked across the street, my stomach twisted into knots. I watched her step out of her car, glance around nervously, then walk through the sliding glass doors. Less than a minute later, Justin appeared. They exchanged a quick hug before heading inside together. I sat there, frozen, my eyes locked on the hotel entrance. It felt like someone had shoved a knife straight into my gut. But the pain only sharpened my focus. When she came home later that night, her hair wet from a shower she didn't take at home, I knew I had everything I needed. We need to talk, I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Her smile faltered. What's wrong? I held up her phone. This. The color drained from her face. And in that moment, I knew everything was about to change. Part 4. Something in me snapped that night. It wasn't rage, not exactly. It was more like a cold clarity, a sudden realization that the life I thought I was living was nothing but a carefully constructed lie. And I wasn't about to keep playing the fool. The next morning, Laura was her usual cheerful self, chattering about her schedule like nothing had changed. Maybe nothing had for her. But for me, everything was different. I started by doing what any rational man would do in this situation. I contacted a lawyer. Not some half-assed general practice attorney, either. This guy was the best divorce lawyer in the state, a ruthless shark with a reputation for tearing apart anyone foolish enough to cross his clients. I laid everything out for him. The texts, the hotel meetup, the late nights and lame excuses. He nodded along, his pen gliding across a yellow notepad with mechanical precision. Full custody, I said. I want full custody of our kids. No negotiations. It's not impossible, he replied, his voice calm and measured. Especially if we can prove infidelity and establish that she's been neglecting her responsibilities. Whatever it takes, I said. Money's not an issue. He looked up from his notes, eyes gleaming with that predatory edge I needed on my side. Good. Then let's get to work. The next step was gathering evidence. I wasn't about to walk into court with just hearsay and assumptions. I needed solid proof. And so, I became my own private investigator. I installed tracking software on Laura's phone, something discreet, undetectable. It gave me access to her messages, call logs, even her location. Every time she texted Justin, every time she made plans to meet him, I knew. But that wasn't enough. I bought a high-quality camera with a zoom lens, something capable of snapping clear photos from a distance. I started following her whenever she claimed to be working late. Sure enough, her hospital shifts weren't the only thing she was clocking in for. It became routine. She'd leave the house, a perfect smile plastered on her face, and I'd tail her from a distance. Sometimes she'd go straight to the hotel, other times she'd meet him at bars or restaurants. They always tried to be discreet, but they were careless, complacent. The more evidence I collected, the colder I became. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't angry. I was just focused. After 2 weeks of documenting their affair, I brought everything to my lawyer. The photos, the text messages, the hotel receipts I'd managed to access thanks to some creative hacking. This, my lawyer said, sifting through the pile of evidence with a smirk, is more than enough. But I wasn't finished. Laura and I had built a life together, a house, bank accounts, investments. I wasn't about to let her walk away with half of everything just because she decided to screw around with some hospital nobody. So, I started moving assets. Quietly, carefully. Transferring funds to accounts she had no access to. Liquidating investments under her name and consolidating them under mine. I left enough to keep her from getting suspicious, but not enough to matter. I also reached out to Jonathan. He was furious when I told him everything. More than that, he was ready to help me however he could. If Samantha knew about this, he growled, she'd lose her damn mind. And Justin's career would be over. Exactly, I said. But we'll get to that. The plan was simple. I would let Laura keep digging her own grave, feeding me evidence and ammunition. And when the time was right, I'd hit her with everything. But I wasn't about to stop there. Justin needed to be dealt with too. Jonathan helped me dig into Justin's personal life. Turns out, he was married. Happily, if you asked his wife. The hypocrisy of it all made my blood boil. We put together a nice little package for her: photos, messages, all the dirt I'd managed to collect. When I finally mailed it to her, I included a polite note suggesting she get herself tested for STDs. A little touch of cruelty, sure, but he'd earned it. The divorce proceedings were brutal, just as I expected. Laura tried to play innocent at first, but the evidence was undeniable. When her lawyer saw what I'd brought to the table, the negotiation turned into a surrender. I got full custody of our children. Every last financial advantage I'd maneuvered into place paid off. She was left with scraps, a mere fraction of what she'd expected to walk away with. But even that wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel what I'd felt. The betrayal. The humiliation. So, I made sure her little affair became public knowledge. Social media is a powerful tool when used correctly. Photos of her and Justin at the hotel circulated faster than wildfire. Her reputation at the hospital tanked. Justin's wife left him, and from what I heard, took him to the cleaners. Laura's life crumbled around her, and I watched from a safe distance, my kids by my side, knowing that she'd done this to herself. The revenge was satisfying. But more than that, it was necessary. It was my way of taking back control, of reclaiming the life she tried to ruin. I wasn't finished rebuilding myself yet, but at least now, I had a foundation to start from. Part 5. The divorce was finalized faster than I expected. A brutal, merciless process that left Laura with barely enough to keep her head above water. Her reputation was in tatters, her affair with Justin nothing but gossip fodder for everyone who'd ever respected her. She tried reaching out once. Some pathetic attempt at reconciliation that came off more like a desperate plea for financial support than an apology. I didn't bother responding. She wasn't my problem anymore. After the dust settled, I packed up the kids and left the town that had become little more than a graveyard of memories. New York was where I decided to plan our new roots. The city's unforgiving pace suited me just fine. It didn't care about your past. It only cared about what you could do now. And I was doing better than ever. The engineering firm I joined took one look at my resume and snapped me up. Turns out, being relentless and unforgiving has its perks. I poured everything into my work, every ounce of rage, betrayal, and pain. And it paid off. Promotions came faster than I could keep track of. My name climbed higher on the corporate ladder until I was the one calling the shots. The salary was obscene, the power intoxicating. I rebuilt everything Laura tried to destroy and then some. The kids thrived in New York. The schools were better, the opportunities endless. They adapted quickly, as kids often do, soaking up the energy of the city and leaving their mother's mistakes in the past where they belonged. Laura tried to fight for visitation rights at first, but the courts sided with me. Full custody meant just that. And given her reputation and the mess she made of her own life, no judge was going to hand her another chance to screw things up. From what I heard through the grapevine, she bounced between jobs, her colleagues no longer trusting her after her scandal went public. Justin was long gone, his own marriage obliterated by the chaos he'd created. His wife had taken him for everything, leaving him worse off than Laura. The funny thing about betrayal is how it clears your vision. Strips away all the illusions you once clung to. I stopped caring what people thought. Stopped playing by rules designed to keep me complacent. The world had shown me its ugly side, and I adapted to meet it head-on. I found new friends, real ones. People who valued loyalty and integrity over convenience and fake smiles. Jonathan moved to New York a few months after I did, ditching his old life for something that actually made him happy. We rebuilt our friendship from the ground up, stronger than ever. Therapy helped, but not in the way the shrink probably intended. I didn't go there to heal or forgive or any of that bullshit. I went there to sharpen my mind. To purge the last bits of weakness Laura had left behind. The nights were the worst, at first. I'd lie awake in the penthouse apartment I'd managed to secure, staring at the ceiling, the city's glow spilling through the curtains. But slowly, that bitterness began to fade. I learned to channel it, to turn it into fuel. My life became a series of calculated victories. Promotions, awards, accolades. I devoured them all, refusing to let a single achievement slip through my fingers. And the women. They came and went, none of them lasting longer than a few months. I made it clear I wasn't looking for anything serious. I had my kids to think about, my career, my own sanity. Laura reached out again, months after the divorce was finalized. A pitiful email begging for another chance, as if she thought some half-assed apology would erase the damage she'd done. I deleted it without reading past the first line. New York became my sanctuary, a place where I could bury the past and build something better. I took the kids to Central Park on weekends, showed them Broadway shows and art galleries. We made new traditions, carved out a life that had nothing to do with her. Every time I looked at them, I felt that surge of pride and determination all over again. They were my reason, my purpose, and nothing Laura did could ever take that away from me. I didn't just move on, I excelled. I thrived. I became someone she could never touch again. The last time I heard about her, she was back in that small town, working a dead-end job at some clinic that barely paid the bills. Her beauty had faded, replaced by a bitterness she could never quite hide. Good. I never wanted her back. Never even wanted an apology. I wanted her to rot in the mess she created, to feel the emptiness she left me with and know that she'd never be a part of our lives again. I kept climbing, kept pushing forward, and with each step, I left her further behind. Now, she's nothing but a shadow, a ghost I've long since outgrown. I won, and nothing will ever change that. The end.